So David and I are kind of obsessed with this Jordan Peterson, Pierre Poilievre interview, and I think you know I'm not super impressed aesthetically with Poilievre, but I also think I don't know how many liberal politicians could do that performance, and a lot of it is, I think, I would say, let's call it self-congratulatory to not be too mean, but like the way that we talk about, oh, we're having these long conversations, but it's true that there's something there to it. And here's a little section of it that kind of goes to, it was resonant with us as Americans and the whole the economy is already great campaign that we were subjected to with Mark Cuban and Kamala Harris. But they're here's Polyev, I kind of saying something that, I mean, the NDP should be able to be the ones capturing. Here's talk about housing.
So what have you learned, and what has it made you convinced of, let's say?
Well, first of all, there's the bad news and the good news. The bad news is that people feel like they've done absolutely everything right and their lives are trapped. Young people say, look, okay, I went through, I got an education, I work nonstop, and I have made the calculation that there is no mathematical path for me to own a house. Mm-hmm. It's just not possible. In Toronto here, for example, if you take the average income and the average house price, it would take you 29 years to save up for a down payment. So, if you're
for a down payment,
not to pay it off, forget paying it off. And so if you're a young woman who's got a biological clock, obviously, we'll do the math.
I'll just stop him there. He is talking about, in his weird way, about, again, social reproduction, which should be something the Social Democrats cover. So, Poilievre speaks to that, I think, kind of in a way, in an astute way that maybe, like, we're worried what comes after Trump. Will somebody be able to do that in America? Like that. I mean, talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll just say, I'm glad you guys had me on, if only, to demonstrate for your viewers that not all Canadians talk like Jordan Peterson. I don't think he's ever sounded this bad. His voice has always sounded like, a withered balloon, like caught in the act of deflating. But now I feel like there's gravel inside the balloon or something too. That is very distracting throughout that clip. But that you showed from Poilievre right there is one of the main reasons why the Conservatives have been able to establish the double-digit lead in the polls that they currently enjoy. I mean, they are as high as 46% in some polls, which if they won, they'd win a massive majority with Canada's first past post electoral system on that basis. And I think what you see from Poilievre in that clip is the kind of thing he does really well. When he ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party, he did a lot of sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, sort of just like bizarre conservative ideological spectacle, like buying shawarma with Bitcoin and as like a campaign gimmick and that sort of stuff. And I think he's succeeded by kind of disciplining those instincts and instead just doing what you saw in that clip. Because between, a government which is kind of insisting that, like, we're delivering for the middle class, everything's basically fine, maybe times are tough, but, like, hey, things could be worse. And what you just saw from Poilievre, which, if nothing else, kind of, it bears witness to the reality that people are experiencing, the lived reality of, like, a really significant cost of living crisis. And what he says about, major cities, I live in one, is absolutely true. Now, it's Poilievre has really yet to attach much of a positive program to all of that. And insofar as he has, and if his own kind of history, he's been in politics. I think he was elected first in either 2006 or 2004. He's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And he was in cabinet in the previous Conservative government. So we know a fair bit about him, and he's very much a right-wing ideologue. He'll he understands that, there aren't enough houses, and his way of getting more houses built will be to help developers cut corners and cut their taxes and that kind of thing. So, some of the fears that have arisen, I think, in the United States around the possibility that conservatives will embrace maybe like selective welfarism and a kind of a exclusionary welfare state and like certain exclusionary kinds of redistribution. I don't think Poilievre comes from that current of the right. I think in many ways he's quite a traditional neoliberal conservative. But he's, as you just saw there, quite a disciplined one. And that message is resonating in a climate where the main alternative has hitherto been Justin Trudeau.
I mean, has he been able to sort of get away from his history in politics? Because, it reminds me of similar like Bolsonaro, or Bolsonaro was in government for a really long time. And yeah, it was sort of talked about this newcomer. I mean, could you talk about like just publicly if that's something that he gets kind of questioned or challenged on?
I mean, to be honest, not so much since he's become leader. I mean, one of the really puzzling things about the Liberal strategy over the last couple of years is that they haven't really rolled out, when he became leader, they didn't roll out a big suite of attack ads or anything like that. And there's 20 years of Pierre Poilievre saying the most, insane, hard right statements about how we need to like eliminate the welfare state and have a bare bones survival state, or, God knows what else. And he was a very kind of toxic and divisive figure when he was in cabinet in the previous Tory government. That stuff hasn't really come up at all. I suspect if there's, when there's a federal election, it will come up. And I think, the question will be whether it works. I mean, I will say that in Canada, the precedent is very much that conservative leaders are very, very they run away from all of this stuff. And in the past, they've actually been like significantly imperiled by like the right wing of the Conservative Party and the conservative movement. During the Bush era, that was a really big problem for them. The fact that our conservative movement has a very Americanized character and draws a lot of inspiration from the United States is going to be a problem for Pierre Poilievre in a context where, 70% plus of Canadians really dislike, Donald Trump, and probably more now, in the wake of his tariff threats. So whether Poilievre's, past statements are going to catch up with him is a really interesting question. We'll just have to see. I guess just as one final point on this, I mean, he really is kind of a test case of this style of conservative politics in Canada, this kind of conservative leader. His two predecessors, the Tories have had, he's the third Tory leader since 2018. The two previous leaders, Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole, both kind of won the leadership by running on the right, and then instantly just tried to become these like innocuous, cuddly, like suburban dads, because that's the understood kind of way for the Conservative Party to win elections. And Pierre Poilievre, whatever else, is not trying to win that way.
Our boy Jordan Peterson has a question to this effect, so let's just get this exchange.
As an example, is because
he mentions the Tories in the UK, acknowledging climate change. As
right.
Oops, there you go.
Well, they were a conservative government, and they certainly didn't govern by anything approximating conservative principles. And so, how do you feel about the probability that if the Conservatives in Canada take power, that they'll be enticed into this global utopian delusion that seems to have enveloped so many leaders, kind of regardless of their political stripe? What do you
Matt,
think,
can you just pause
if anything,
really
can inoculate?
I'm just so sorry. This we're not doing media criticism here. We're trying to talk about the substance, but like everything about this entire interview is insane. Look at the way that Pierre's sitting this entire time. His socks, he has about like 6 inches. Like you can see his entire calf muscle here. I don't know. It's like it's a very unsettling way.
What is this room that Peterson is broadcasting from? Has he been exiled to Siberia? Like, is this his usual set that he uses?
Yes, it is actually, which is crazy.
Kind of regardless of their political stripe. What do you think, if anything, can inoculate you or has inoculated you against that?
I thought we don't like inoculate.
I know better.
Well, elaborate. What do you mean?
I'm not going to do that. And it will be hard, because the temptation will be, this is the mistake that conservative parties around the world have made countless times. They think, Well, anybody who's got a conservative mindset is already voting for me, so I can go off and chase the
Right.
ideas of my political opponents, and then everyone will love me because I'll have the conservatives due to the fact that I have the name conservative, and then I'll have all these other people because I've embraced their contrary.
Matt, you've muted yourself.
I mean, that's kind of not a little bit less interesting. It's sort of what Kamala Harris did, exactly. But yeah, like he later goes on and says, "You can trust me, but I also had these opinions since I was a kid, and in the previous conservative administration," which kind of seems like a contradiction in terms of being an outsider, changing things and not going back. But anyway, yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, Poilievre, whatever else he is, he's definitely not an outsider. I mean, he's worked, like, I think he was first elected when he was 24. Like, he's basically only worked as a member of parliament for the Conservative Party, and he may have even worked for the party as an operative. Before that, probably like Carleton University, Young Conservatives before that. So yeah, he's not an outsider. Although honestly, the contrast between him and Peterson in that clip is pretty remarkable because Poilievre is somebody whose affect I've always found rather strange. And yet, if you look at how he's styled in that clip, if just the way he speaks, the just normal, plain language that he uses as compared to the way Peterson talks, I mean, it's amazing that Peterson, I know I'm derailing things by focusing on Peterson here, and you guys are interested in the Canadian politician he was speaking to, but like, it's amazing that Peterson's whole thing is like, we just need to reassert, normal, and like we're the side of the ideological spectrum that like represents normal, and it's like, buddy, like, have you listened to yourself? Have you seen yourself? You just use the phrase global utopian delusion in common speak. And another thing about that clip that's amazing is Peterson's whole premise there, where it's like, oh yeah, the UK Conservatives were in power for 15 years and they didn't govern like according to conservative principles. Guys like him are always doing this. It's amazing how real conservatism has never been tried. You know what I mean?